Donald Trump didn't proclaim a Trump doctrine during his first term in office, but his critics did. The Atlantic's editor Jeffrey Goldberg said it comprised no friends, no enemies, permanent destabilization that creates American advantage, and we're America, meaning there was no need to apologize for anything. My guest this week is Derek Burney, who's the former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and a former Canadian ambassador in Washington from 1989 to 93. Welcome, Derek.
Nice to be with you, John.
What do you think of that description? Is that a fair summation of what we can expect from Trump 2.0?
Well, you know, most of the media in America is very biased against Trump. So I take with a grain of salt some of the sweeping generalizations that people make. There's no question but that he was the like of which America has never seen and will be, I'm sure, this time around. But, you know, one of the results from this election is that the so-called legacy media in America has lost credibility across the board. They were so interlaced with the Democrats and with the Democrat candidate that, you know, it's not a surprise to me that the social media and Fox News and the New York Post and the very few non-legacy media that are in the United States are more in favor. I mean, Trump in this election tapped into a very sour mood in the country. They've been told for the last 3 years that things are never better, you know, that things are great. And yet they know from inflation and from their day-to-day experience with the economy that that's not the case. So there was a sour mood in America that I think Trump tapped into very successfully in this campaign, because he kept hammering away at the economic issues, at the disruption on the border, at the increase in crime, allegations that the FBI denied 6 months ago, and then they had to retool their predictions and say that, oh yeah, crime is really up. It's that kind of thing that gives you a very fuzzy view, generally, John, of what's going on here.
And we should explain that you are actually in the US, so you saw this firsthand.
Yeah, I've been here and I've lived here for 5 years. So I've seen it in all its glory. Anyway, I don't want to overstate it. I'm just saying, because I think there are a lot of risks that we have to, as Canadians, be concerned about the second Trump administration, especially on trade. But, you know, we can go into that. But in terms of the election result, this was a stunning comeback that nobody predicted. None of the pollsters, they're all now saying, well, you know, it was in the margin of error. Well, that's bullshit, and you know it. But that's the way they play the game. And that's what he was fighting against. But it was a stunning victory. It was basically on economic issues, because the mood in America is sour. People don't believe that things are getting better. His most effective line in the campaign was the old Reagan line that he used against Jimmy Carter so successfully. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And everybody said no. 3/4 of the country, John, say that the country's moving in the wrong direction. Well, it's pretty hard for an incumbent to buck that tide. And to Harris's credit, she did her best to try to straddle between defending the Biden administration record and offering herself as an agent of change. That's a pretty big straddle.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's go there. You just mentioned trade. Let's talk about the bilateral relationship and the implications that flow from what you've just described. And then we can move on to defence. There is, it seems to me, an intrinsic link between trade and defence, particularly for the Americans. It's not quite clear what is coming at us yet. The co-chair of Trump's transition team, Howard Lutnick, dismissed the notion that this 10% tariff that Trump has talked about would apply to everything. Rather, it would be on specific products and would be used as a negotiating tool. On the other hand, Robert Lighthizer, who was US trade representative in the first Trump administration, has said it will be across the board, that tariffs will grow every year until trade deficits end. And Canada has a trade surplus with the US right now. So what do you expect?
Well, I would hope that the administration will keep its powder dry with Canada, because there is a review of the USMCA that's due in 2026. And, Lighthizer was the architect of the USMCA. So I would think any tariff that they impose unilaterally on Canada would violate that agreement. The agreement that they negotiated, that they got passed by Congress by an overwhelming majority. So I don't think we should start tearing our hair out too soon until we have an opportunity to see who the new players in the cabinet are going to be. And, I would just not tear our hair out immediately. The Europeans are going to react in the same way. And they've said publicly that they're going to hit back hard and fast. So, Trump and his team are going to adopt a somewhat measured approach to trade.
I mean, we remember from 2018 when the U.S. did impose tariffs that there was a lot of heat coming from U.S. congressmen when we retaliated, other people retaliated, and it starts to hurt at home.
It's not a one-way street, John. He says it's the most beautiful word in the dictionary, tariffs, but, anyone knows from history that that's not the case. If you start imposing tariffs and retaliating with more tariffs, everybody loses, nobody wins. So I think we've got to be alert. Don't get me wrong. We've got to be alert, and we've got to insist that the USMCA terms are lived up to. The Americans have destroyed the WTO's dispute settlement mechanism by not appointing judges to the appeal panel. Well, that wasn't Trump. That was Biden. And it's gone on for more than 4 years. And it's completely shattered any enforcement prospects of the WTO. So the big thing we've got to hang our hat on is the dispute settlement mechanism of the USMCA. And it was actually strengthened in the USMCA from the NAFTA agreement that I was involved in and the original FTA agreement. The Americans explicitly cannot avoid appointing people to rosters to adjudicate those panels. That's something the WTO wishes it probably had in that institution.
So, I take your point that this was an agreement that Trump signed. At the same time, we do seem intent on poking the bear. We've got legislation pending to take dairy, eggs, and poultry off the table of any review. Yeah. And we've passed a tax on digital giants that even the Democrats consider discriminatory. Yeah. Should we be reconsidering those kind of irritants?
Well, my views on supply management, I probably couldn't express in normal language. This is the biggest vulnerability we always have had in trade negotiations. We gave up a little in NAFTA, we gave up a little more in the USMCA, but we're still talking about trivial modifications. We got something back from the Americans on sugar and sugar-containing products. That's a game that's gone on for years. But I think we're vulnerable on that for sure, and we've got to be ready. I know that the Parliament is considering a bill that it seems to me makes no sense whatsoever. It's going to make legislation that insists that the supply management system be maintained regardless of what happens in any trade negotiation. I've heard from a direct source, namely my son, who testified before a Senate committee last week, that the Senate is not on that page. The Senate is going to reject that bill. And so that's going to put the fly in the ointment. And it's beyond me, John, why there's such slavish devotion to a system that is expensive for Canadian customers, does no good in any trade relationship. We pay for our Western Canadian agriculture because we're defending supply management. That's how it works.
Sure. Yep. Let's move briefly on. I remember arguing that Trudeau, despite his shortcomings elsewhere, actually performed quite well in dealing with Trump, at least to a point. He was civil, positive, flexible, emphatic when he needed to be, at least until he said at the G7 in Charlevoix that Trump, he wouldn't be pushed around by Trump, and then this provoked a mid-air meltdown from Trump, who was on his way to meet the North Korean leader, if you remember.
Right. But he started off with a photo of his dad meeting Trump when Trump was a young man.
Yes,
Trump,
yes. I was in Washington when that was handed over, and it was well received.
Trump was flattered beyond belief. Oh,
Yeah.
well, yeah, Justin knew the tactic of getting through to this guy.
Can he repeat that performance, or do you think that we need a Poilievre government to sort of freshen the palate?
Well, I think that, you wanted to talk about defense. I think our biggest vulnerability with the Americans is our pathetic performance on defense. And unless this notion that we're going to meet the NATO commitment within 8 years is ridiculous. Trump will not stand for that. And we should never forget that national security is more important in America now than it ever was under previous administrations that I dealt with. So we've got to get our act together on this one. I mean, it's just pathetic. John, our military is being described as hopelessly obsolete by American experts. That is not a good position of strength to begin any negotiation.
There was a report out, a parliamentary budget officer report, which came out and said the Defence Department has flattered, if not inflated, the numbers, so that by 2029 we're not going to be at 1.76%, we're going to be at 1.58%, which means 2% by 2032 is even more unattainable. We've said we'll get there. We have no plan to get there. And the PBO says if you do want to get there, you've got to double what you're spending right now. It does seem to be a real mess.
What we need, John, is we need an Elon Musk type examination of waste and costs of government. We're not in good shape if the fastest growing sector of our economy is the public service. And yet that is the case. So we need a draconian effort to cut costs in government so money can be devoted to national security. We need it for the simple other reason of reducing the regulations that are stifling the growth of our economy. I mean, we're a basket case economically and in terms of defense. If we don't change tack, I think the prospects are going to be very grim for Canada. And the Americans will be watching both. They're going to watch what we're going to do with our economy, with our government budget, and with our defense commitment. And we better be ready.
Let's just round off with the sort of bigger picture. Beyond the bilateral relationship, do you foresee this as a period of undiluted isolationism in which America is essentially hostile to alliances? Or do you agree with Trump's former national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, said, America first is not America alone?
Yeah, well, there are sensible people like O'Brien, and I hope Mike Pompeo comes back into the administration, not as Secretary of State, but hopefully as Secretary of Defense. You need some people like that around Trump to, he's never going to become fond of alliances that he didn't create. That's the problem. He wasn't there at the creation, so he has no time for it. But
could he pull out? Do you think he could pull out of NATO?
No, I don't think. I think that the Congress would stop that. I mean, the Senate, the House may be a bit wacky, but the Senate is still a stable of normal opinion. So I don't think anything that rash will happen. I worry about Ukraine. I worry about Taiwan, with good reason. But I don't see anything disastrous on the NATO front, as long as countries make their commitments. And Canada is one of the biggest bloody delinquents.
For sure. Just to round things up, Derek, Chrystia Freeland came out the other day and said, the morning after Trump's victory, that Canada will be absolutely fine. Is that looking at the picture through rose-coloured spectacles?
Well, that's looking in the mirror and say, aren't I beautiful? No, I mean, I can understand why she's saying things like that. She doesn't want to frighten Canadians to think that the world is coming to an end. There are a lot of Americans who think the world is coming to an end now that this guy has been reelected. And that the Democrats are tearing themselves apart, trying to point fingers at whose fault, who lost this election. We spent $1 billion on the election and we lost. Trump spent $400 million and he won.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you very much for taking the time.
Okay, John. Great.
Be well.
You too.
Wrap up. I gather the snow's falling, so.
I got to get back on my Ranger and plow.
Good luck.
Good to see you.